For over a decade, Dallas ruled primetime. Its twisted plots, oil-fueled power games, and the unforgettable face of J.R. Ewing made it one of the most-watched dramas in television history. But behind the glitz and the glamorous ranch gates, something far darker was unfolding. Because while the world was obsessed with who shot J.R., the real story was who walked away from him and why she never came back. After years of silence, Victoria Principal, the elegant and guarded woman behind Pamela Barnes Ewing, finally revealed the truth about her time on Dallas and what Larry Hagman, the man who played J.R., did that forced her to leave it all behind. And what she said has shaken everything fans thought they knew. Because for Victoria, this wasn't just about an on-screen feud. This was personal. And it all came down to one moment where she looked across the set at Larry Hagman and realized he had crossed a line she could never uncross. In the early days of Dallas, Victoria Principal was the heart of the show. Not the flashiest character, not the loudest, but the emotional anchor. As Pamela Barnes Ewing, she played the woman torn between two warring families, the Barnes and the Ewings, trying to build a life with a man whose last name brought her nothing but pain. And she did it with grace, quiet strength, and vulnerability that millions of women related to. She wasn't just beautiful, she was sympathetic, resilient, and to many viewers, Pam was the only sane one in a world spinning out of control. But behind the scenes, things weren't as balanced. Because while Pamela and Bobby were supposed to be equals, the power dynamics told a different story. And Larry Hagman, playing J.R., was quietly becoming the sun around which everything else orbited. In interviews years later, crew members recalled how Hagman's charisma off-screen often turned into control. He was funny, yes, legendary for his wild antics and practical jokes, but also intense, territorial, and sometimes intimidating. And for Victoria Principal, that wasn't just uncomfortable. It was unsustainable. She was a serious actress, trained, focused. She came to work prepared. She respected the craft. Larry, on the other hand, was known to show up with a drink in hand or two. He'd party late into the night, then try to improvise scenes on the fly. Directors indulged him. Producers enabled him. Because J.R. wasn't just a character. He was a ratings machine, and no one wanted to risk offending the star who was carrying the show. No one, except Victoria. She kept her composure. She stayed professional. But the tension was building. Quietly, relentlessly. She later admitted, in her own words, that the environment had become a place where I didn't feel protected. And while she never publicly attacked Hagman directly, those close to the production knew exactly who she meant. At one point, when asked why she never returned for reunions or spin-offs, she didn't hesitate. I felt I had said everything I could say with Pamela, and I had nothing more to give to that world. But others behind the scenes whispered something else. They said it wasn't about the role. It was about J.R. What most fans don't know is just how dramatic Victoria's final season truly was. At the end of season 10, Pamela was injured in a fiery car crash. Her face was bandaged. Her fate was uncertain. Producers begged Victoria to return. They wanted to write her recovery, bring her back, and reignite the Pam-Bobby love story. Larry Hagman himself reportedly tried to convince her, but Victoria refused. And when she did speak years later, she admitted it wasn't just about the storylines. There were things happening on that set that didn't align with my values anymore, she said carefully. She never raised her voice, never named names, but she didn't have to, because everyone knew what she was saying. Larry Hagman had become too powerful, too unpredictable. He made the set a place where others, especially the women, had to adapt to his mood, his schedule, his behavior, and Victoria wasn't willing to play that game anymore. She wanted respect, equal footing, a workplace where professionalism mattered more than celebrity. But on Dallas, that wasn't the world she was walking into each morning. So, in the middle of one of the most successful runs in television history, she packed up her dressing room, said goodbye to Pamela Barnes Ewing, and walked out. It was a move that shocked fans. But for Victoria, it was a line in the sand. And once J.R. crossed it, there was no going back. Victoria's exit from Dallas wasn't just a career move. It was a statement. At a time when actors were expected to smile, nod, and carry on, no matter what happened behind closed doors. She chose something most actresses didn't dare. She chose herself. And for millions of women watching from home, many of them navigating their own quiet battles in marriages, workplaces, or families, it didn't go unnoticed. Because Pamela wasn't just Bobby's wife on screen. She was their voice, the one who kept her dignity in a world ruled by greed, corruption, and egos the size of Texas. And walking away from JR, that wasn't just the character. It was everything he stood for. Even decades later, women remember where they were when Pamela disappeared from the screen. The explosion, the accident, the face wrapped in bandages, the uncertainty, the pain. And then, nothing. No goodbye. No funeral. No closure. Producers tried to fill the void, bringing in new female characters, reshuffling plots, even introducing a temporary Pamela lookalike in one storyline. But none of it worked. The soul of the show had vanished. Why? Because Victoria wasn't just acting. She was Pamela. Her strength, her grace, her restraint in the face of JR's smirking evil made her indispensable. She gave women someone to root for, not because she played dirty, but because she refused to. And that kind of quiet power, it couldn't be replaced. Still, the Dallas machine didn't stop. The ratings kept climbing, and the pressure on Victoria to return became relentless. Network executives called. Writers pitched new arcs. Fans begged. Some even offered to start petitions. And behind the scenes, Larry Hagman tried too. He knew the chemistry between JR and Pamela, icy, tense, morally opposite, was part of what made the show work. Without her, the darkness of JR had no balance, no contrast. But what no one seemed to grasp was this. Victoria didn't just leave. She escaped. She was offered money. She was promised creative control. She was even asked to return for just a few flashback scenes. But each time, she said no. And when asked why, her answer never changed. I had said all I could say with Pamela. I had nothing more to give her. To the public, that sounded poetic, mysterious. But to those who had worked beside her on set, it meant something more. Because by the time Victoria walked away, the atmosphere on Dallas had become toxic. It wasn't one incident. It was years of small humiliations, of being ignored in the writer's room, of watching male actors given freedom while the women were kept in tight narrative boxes. And always, there was Larry. Larry Hagman, brilliant, iconic, but increasingly erratic. He was the show's engine, but also its shadow. Off camera, he was known for spiking his drinks on set, hosting impromptu parties in his trailer, pulling wild pranks on cast and crew. Some found him charming, others exhausting. Victoria, she found him impossible, not because he was cruel, but because he was unpredictable. And unpredictability is a form of power. She never knew who she'd be facing that day, a professional co-star or a man determined to steal the scene. Sometimes he'd change lines mid-shoot. Sometimes he'd turn a serious scene into a joke. And the directors? They rarely stopped him, because Hagman was Dallas. He could do no wrong. And that, more than anything, was what drove Victoria away. She wasn't just frustrated. She was exhausted. Exhausted from being the one who always showed up on time, who knew her lines, who stayed sober, who took the job seriously, and exhausted from watching those values get her nowhere. In later interviews, she was careful with her words. She never accused Hagman of abuse. She never told a scandalous story. But what she did say, softly, carefully, was this: there were things happening on that set that didn't align with my values anymore. And that sentence, so polite, so restrained, is one of the most devastating things a woman can say. Because everyone knows what it means. It means, I was uncomfortable. I was dismissed. I was no longer safe. Not necessarily in a physical sense, but emotionally, spiritually, professionally. Victoria later shared how her mother taught her to stand up straight, to know her worth, to never let anyone dim her light. And as the years wore on, she realized that staying on Dallas, smiling through the chaos, staying quiet to keep the peace, was doing exactly that. So she made the hardest decision of her career. She left at the top of her game. She gave up fame, fortune, and the kind of household recognition most actresses dream of. And she walked away without a public fight, without a press conference, without even a farewell episode. In a world that rewards drama, Victoria chose dignity. And in doing so, she became a different kind of role model, not just for aspiring actresses, but for every woman who's ever stayed in a situation longer than she should have. For every woman who's ever sat across from a man who was given too much power and decided, this ends here. And though fans may have mourned Pamela's absence, they never stopped loving Victoria. If anything, they respected her more. Because walking away from a man like JR on screen or off isn't easy. But sometimes, it's the only way to survive. After Dallas, Victoria didn't chase another big role. She didn't try to outdo the past. Instead, she built something new. Her skincare brand, Principal Secret, became a quiet empire. Her wellness books helped women care for themselves when no one else would. She produced TV movies that gave other actresses opportunities she often didn't have. And more importantly, she lived life on her terms. Out of the spotlight, without apology, without a need to explain why she said no to everything that came after JR. When Larry Hagman passed away in 2012, many fans expected her to break her silence. He had shaped the show. He was, in many ways, the beating heart of Dallas, and she had shared the screen with him for years. But Victoria didn't post a tribute, didn't issue a statement, didn't appear in the retrospectives or reunion clips. And that silence said everything. Not out of spite, but because some wounds don't need reopening, and some stories deserve to be left where they ended. When asked years later what she learned most from her time on Dallas, Victoria didn't talk about the fame or the success. She said, "I learned when to fight and when to leave, and how to do both with grace." That's the legacy, not just of Pamela Barnes Ewing, but of Victoria Principal. A woman who saw behind the curtain of one of television's most powerful shows and walked away with her power intact. Because long after the oil wells dried up and the ratings faded, fans weren't asking who shot JR anymore. They were asking something else. Why did Victoria Principal never come back? And now they know. Because JR may have ruled South Fork Ranch, but Victoria drew the line, and she never let anyone cross it again. For more of the latest news, check out this video.